Hello, world changers. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the pictures that I took on my trip last summer when I went to Auschwitz Birkenau, and another couple little hot spots for my trip having to do with the Holocaust. I know I promised this video last Friday, but I got caught up on a bunch of paperwork, so go ahead and make it today and post it so that you guys can see firsthand what this looked like, or at least what it looks like today, and a couple other fun things from my trip. Not super fun, because it's still the Holocaust, but interesting, for sure. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. We're going to look at some pictures. All right. So, full screen it out here. This is the main tower at the entrance of Auschwitz concentration camp. Just to give you a little bit of background, Auschwitz is the main extermination camp people talk about. It's definitely the most famous, and it was the one that killed the most people. However, it's not just one camp. It's actually several camps put together. So you'll see like Auschwitz 1, 2, and 3, or sometimes you'll hear them called Auschwitz and Birkenau. So I'm going to be showing you both Auschwitz and Birkenau. They're pretty close together. But also, like, I'll show you the difference between Auschwitz and Birkenau, and keep in mind that we had to take a drive to get from Auschwitz to Birkenau. It's like a 15-minute drive, whereas they would make the Jewish and other victims from the Holocaust, they would make them walk the difference between Auschwitz and Birkenau throughout their time. So just kind of keep that in mind. But this is Auschwitz. This is the main camp. It was built first, and it was basically the only camp until this one started to overflow, because near the end of World War II, when Hitler found his final solution, started ramping up all of this extermination, they had to build another camp because Auschwitz was getting overcrowded. So the prisoners from Auschwitz actually built Birkenau, and then more prisoners came in and lived in Birkenau. So you can see here, this is the main guard tower for the main building, so they could see anyone coming in or anyone trying to escape. And then these next two pictures show you the gate above the entrance. This is the main entrance that everything from cars to prisoners would be taken through. And it says, Arbeit macht free. I'm not sure about the pronunciation because I don't speak German. However, I do know that this whole gate is very famous because the message it says is, through work comes freedom, or something like that. Through work you will be free, because the idea is that you would work off your debt and then be free. That's what a lot of people thought when they were coming in. However, what it turned out to be is, through work you will die and then be free of this suffering. Very awful. This one, also, you'll have to kind of ignore most of the people in the shot. It is a very important historical site, so I was just one on a huge tour of people who were going through. Like, by no means is it some tourist trap or whatever, because they take a lot of care to make sure that the message is remembered and that there's a lot of respect as you go through the camp. However, it is still a very important site, and they want people to come and reflect and remember what happened, and to kind of feel for the people who lost their lives here. So you can see there's a lot of people on the trip. Some of them were people who were on the trip with me. This is actually my sister right down here. And what you'll notice is that we all have headphones. Part of the way that they keep that reverence, that quiet, is that it's not a tour guide saying everything. It's a tour guide speaking into a microphone, and that everybody else has earphones on that are tuned to his frequency or her frequency, so that you can hear what the tour guide is saying. So here you can see a little bit closer in. Arbeit macht free. Again, not sure. But through work, you will be free. meaning through death, freedom and death. So you can see here, they have the fence, barbed wire all the way around, curved in, making sure that people can't get out because they would have to like literally climb over the barbed wire, making it very difficult. And even from there, there's still 10 feet in between the barbed wire and any other buildings. And that's on purpose so that it's very easy to spot if someone's trying to cross to the barbed wire. This is one of the main buildings. This was actually the kitchen and the processing building. They didn't feed them much, but they did feed some. Here at the entrance, you can see this is a historical photo that shows the orchestra that would greet people as they came into Auschwitz at the beginning. Because as you can imagine, people were being shoved into cattle cars. They'd been there for days on end, and they were being taken to these camps with a lot of times separated from their loved ones. They didn't know what was going on. So they would set up this orchestra to try and calm people down, because when people are calm, they're easier to order around and they won't fight you as much. So they made it look like a big happy celebration. Here you can see the camp orchestra had to assemble here to play marches while the prisoners filed past. This was to help prisoners keep in step and make it easier to count them as they went to and from work. So it would serve the two purposes. As they would go to work, it would help them march out, and it would also help greet people as they came in, trying to calm them down, make it seem like it's, yippee, you're at this camp now. And really, as we've seen from the documentary and read in the article, that was not the case. So they would actually use prisoners, because, I mean, you gotta imagine a lot of these people were like famous musicians, or at least knew how to play an instrument. So when they were taken prisoner, part of the process of getting processed into the camp would be like, what is your occupation? What are any skills that you have? And depending on what that skill was, you might be put into a different job that more suited your skill. Or if it was a useless skill, then you would just be a general laborer. So anyone who is a magician could have been put into this orchestra. And here you can see the actual building in front of which they would play. Now, the way that the memorial is set up is that you have the different houses for Auschwitz, and I'll show you what those houses look like, but each of those houses is kind of a museum on a different aspect of it. So it starts at the beginning, at the selection process. This is one of the pictures of the selection process. You can see where they divided them into two lines. You have the men and boys over here on one side, and then you have the women and children over here, and you would have the SS officers here standing lookout, looking at everyone who passed and then telling them, go that way, go that way. So they were making sure they were going to the right place, whether that was the extermination room, like the gas chambers, for any elderly or people who were too young to be of any work, or to the actual showers to disinfect themselves and get all their valuables off them and put them into prisoner clothes. One of the saddest rooms, like by far, one of the saddest rooms of the whole thing, there was a whole room dedicated to children. This was one of the pictures that was posted. Hundreds of thousands of children were killed during the Holocaust because they were thought to be too young to actually be of any use. Usually, for the youngest ones, their mothers were told to go with them, because separating a mother from a young child like that would have caused more harm than good, because the mother would have fought back or killed herself or something. So a lot of times SS are just like, nah, just kill you both. Absolutely awful. But you can see here a lot of the children. One of the worst exhibits out of the whole thing was a display case of just children's shoes. So itty bitty baby shoes. The youngest child to be killed at Auschwitz was 11 months old. I can't begin to describe to you how difficult it was to go through the camp. I was almost in a state of shock just reading and looking at all these facts and seeing how it actually happened. It's taken a very long time for me to like actually process what I saw. It's like the little bitty baby shoes got me. They also had a model of the process of how gas chambers would happen. So this is kind of a to scale model. This was one of the main crematoriums. Crematoriums 3 and 4 were the biggest out of all of them. I'll actually show you crematorium 1. Crematorium 1 and 2 were very small in comparison. They were kind of like prototypes for crematoriums 3 and 4 where they really got it all down. So you can see people would come in from the ground level over here into an underground chamber that was the showers, as the Nazis were telling them. However, there were holes in the roof where they would drop the poison gas and then kill all the people in the showers. Their bodies would be taken out to a different area, and then one by one, prisoners would carry the bodies up here to the main building where you have the different, this is like the main crematorium, where you have the ovens. So each oven would have spots for 3 bodies, and then they would all go out that main smokestack in the top. This one shows you a little more detail. People would be funneled in here. You can see where everyone is here. Some laying down, some sitting, but they're ready for just like a normal shower. And then as you go further down, you can see they're getting closer to death as the gas takes over. This is the room where they would put all of the bodies, and then people would carry them up to here. You see another pile of bodies, and then other people would carry them to the actual crematorium where people would load them into the ovens. So there's like 3 little doors here, here, and here on each of these ovens where people would be put to be burned. This is the actual chemical that was used to kill the Jews. They would take the little rock like that and mix it with another chemical, or I think it was just mixing it with water to make it into a gaseous form so that the gas would go down, they would be breathed in, and then suffocate all of the people in the gas chambers, because you'd be breathing in this, which is a toxic chemical, instead of oxygen. So it would suffocate and kill the person. Now, look at how much is here, which maybe like 2 or 3 handfuls of the substance. And then these are the canisters that it came in. So you can imagine if that's how much they used for one shower, and there's maybe 3 or 4 of those per each canister, and you have all of these canisters and more, because this is not all of them. This is just some of them, a good portion of them, but that's just some of them. That's how many times these showers were used and how much of this chemical was used to kill people. These are some of the most moving rooms, were just the rooms where you had mounds and mounds of stuff that was taken from people. It used to be their possessions. Like there was rooms with glasses, luggage. Later on we'll see one of shoes, hair, because they would shave the prisoners before going into the showers. They would use that hair to stuff mattresses or pillows or whatever for the German people. It was absolutely monstrous, just awful. Okay, so this is the main street. Each of the buildings are numbered. These are the buildings for Auschwitz, which I want you to keep these in mind as we look at the ones for Birkenau, because they're very different. These are 2-story brick buildings with double paned glass windows. So they're much warmer. They keep out the cold. Germany, they get snow several months out of the year. So sometimes it would be, actually a lot of times, it would be below freezing. So these buildings were actually much better keeping out the cold. They also had several chimneys in them for like fireplaces throughout, because as you'll see in the Birkenau, they had a very different setup. But these were some of the buildings. This is the shoes picture that I was talking about. So everyone upon getting to the camp who was going for extermination would have to completely undress. They would get their hair shaved. If they had any gold teeth, they would take the gold out. And then all of their stuff would be repurposed. So these shoes would be given to other Germans, or the boots would be given to German officers, or that was the idea. However, as you can see, they ended up with more shoes than they could even use, which is why a lot of them were still left here. And mind you, this is one picture of one part of the entire room. So imagine these giant buildings, which were very long, in addition to being pretty tall. And an entire half of the building, it stretches around. It's like you have a whole case on this side, and then you turn, and then there's a whole other case on this side. So this is only maybe a fourth, if that, of the shoes that were actually here. Like, you cannot begin to imagine the magnitude, how many people lost their lives in this camp. This is the outside of one of the other buildings, the outside of the building that had the shoes in it. So you can see here, this would be like the walkway that you walk past, and then this whole room further back there, and there's another window on this side. Whole room that was just filled with the shoes, or that was just filled with suitcases or something like that. It was very telling. Let me keep going. So this, here you can see the kind of brick foundation. That was where the house of the Gestapo used to be. So the Gestapo was the camp, like the secret police of the camp. This one you can read like on the sign, but it's very hard to tell here, so I'll just tell you. So there would be people who would try and resist, who would try and run away, who would try to organize an overthrow, something like that. And they would bring people in and brutally beat them here in the Gestapo if they thought that they were doing the wrong thing. And you can see here, this is a scaffold where the leader of Auschwitz concentration camp, Obergurtenführer, which is like general in our terminology, Hess, I think, Obergurtenführer Hess was actually hanged right on this site after his trial for his crimes. So they kept that there as a memorial of some of the justice that was dealt after the Holocaust. Here you can see this is crematorium 1. So they put it underground to try and mask its purpose. You have the one giant chimney. And then, oh, okay. Well, this was a video. I will try and get the video for you guys, but basically it walks you through what the inside of the gas chamber looks like. And so you go in, first room, it's a nice, not nice, it's a really big room, and then they have little holes in the ceiling, like here and here and here. And that's where they would pour in those pellets of the gas, and then it would foam and get gaseous and then suffocate the people. Then they would take the bodies into the next room, and the next room had 2 ovens that they would put the bodies in, burn them, and the smoke would come out here. Much, much, much smaller than the one that you saw in the model, because these were kind of the testing rings. They were trying to perfect this system, so they built them on a small scale first. And then when they kept getting more and more prisoners, and they were getting more efficient at it, they realized, okay, we need more of these in order to kill the number of prisoners that we want. Again, awful. That was the end of Auschwitz. So that's the main building. That was the first one where they had the bigger buildings, the smaller crematoriums, basically their trial round for everything. The prisoners from Auschwitz actually built Birkenau, which this is the famous site at Birkenau. You'll see this. This is the railroad that the cattle cars would come in on, and they would go through that gate and all the way down, as I'll show you later on. And they would get off of the cattle car and they would be processed in the selection, whether they would go to the extermination room or they would go to the work camp itself. But Birkenau was the main killing center. Auschwitz held most of the working population because it did have better barracks, better food, all of that kind of stuff. So people usually lived there longer because they had a little bit more given to them. Not a lot, but a little bit more. Whereas people in Birkenau had very little, even if they were allowed to survive and work, they still weren't very protected. But Birkenau had the two, actually, I think they had 3, 4, 5, and 6. I think they were in the process of building a 6th crematorium, but they had the massive crematoriums where most of the killing was done. So people would come in on this road here before they got changed. And like I said before, it took us like a 10-15-minute car ride to get to Birkenau. And we got a different guide when we got here, same kind of system with the headphones and everything, but it was a different guy. He was really excellent guide because he was actually Polish and had studied the history and had family who had died in the camps. So it was a different perspective. And he was really good at telling you the difference between, okay, this is my opinion versus this is historical fact. Because a lot of times people mix those two up. He was really good at differentiating between that. Let's keep going through. So this picture I took just to show you the massiveness of this complex, because this is like miles down, and you can see these long houses that the people lived in. Like here, there's just one long hut. Made of bricks, but they were homemade bricks. So the prisoners would actually make the bricks in order to build the house, which would hold them. And they were having to build them at such a fast rate that they weren't nearly as nice as the ones in Auschwitz. They were not nearly as sealed as the ones in Auschwitz. Here you can see a little closer. Some of them are even wood. However, those did not last very long, particularly after the war, because they break down a lot easier. So the brick ones are mostly what you see today. As you'll see in another picture, here, a lot of the houses were actually taken down after World War II because people living in the area, I mean, Germany was destroyed. Poland, which is where Auschwitz is, Poland was destroyed after World War II, both by the Germans coming in and then by the Russians kicking them out and taking over Poland. So a lot of people came to the concentration camp and would steal the bricks out of the buildings in order to build their own houses. Because, I mean, like, they're already built, we'll just take them. So that's why you can see only some like weird chimneys sticking up here. It's because people took the rest of the bricks to build their own houses. Eventually, the people put a stop to this so that the rest of the camp could be preserved for the sake of history, so that people could come and tour and remember what happened here. But you can still see where a lot of that was taken apart. Way back here in the corner there was a different section of the camp that was specifically for gypsies or the Roma people. And they were allowed to live in a little family community back there in like the way corner of the camp, separated from all the other prisoners. Probably just because it made them more docile. I haven't had any like distinct answer on why they were treated differently. However, they had their own community all the way back there in the back. And they would come, they would still do work just like all the other prisoners, but the SS officers would come and do their inspection back there, and they were allowed to stay as a family unit. Anyone who got sick or wasn't doing well, or sometimes they would just take the whole batch of children and just kill them out of nowhere. So I'm really not sure which is better, being separated from your family and then working and dying, or being with your family and having them torn apart while still working and dying. Either way, it's not much better. But they were back here in their own section in the corner of the camp. All the other prisoners were put together in the main houses. Okay, let me go back just one, because you can see here, this is the main railroad, and then you can see a couple others like off to this side and off to this side. There would be a person that controlled where the people got off on and controlled where the train would go so that they could unload better. That's why there's multiple train tracks there. This is an example of one of those cattle cars. I could not get in a bigger picture because there was a big boys group who their tour guide was explaining about the cattle car and all that, so I couldn't really get a closer picture. But these would come down, people would filter out. There's very small windows up in like the top slats on either side, and the rest is dark completely. They were cramped several hundred into one cattle car. So by the time that they actually reached their destination, in Auschwitz, a lot of people had actually died on the journey there, or they were close to death because they were sick from being that hot for so long, or starving, or dying of thirst, or any number of things. But they were absolutely brutal conditions. And so finally you got to taste the fresh air. You would come out into this area, and then this is actually where the selection would happen. They would separate you men, women, and children, and then they would have that selection. And if you look further back, that's where we're going to be going next on my little photo tour that shows you where the crematoriums once stood. Now, this is why I say where they once stood. Now, the Nazis knew once the Russians started coming in, started beating them back, and that once the Nazis started losing the war, they knew that all of their secrets would be found out and that they would get into really big trouble of it. So they tried to destroy as much evidence of their crimes as possible. So they blew up the main crematoriums. The museum put these in place so that you can look down into the staircase where people would go, and then all of this collapsed concrete here was the actual gas chamber itself. So people would go in there, they would dump the chemicals in there, and then they would suffocate. Back here was more the crematorium building. You can see where they have that first layer here that had all the ovens. They had another layer up top. However, all of that is gone. You can only see little bitty bits of the bricks everywhere. They did a very thorough job in blowing them up. Both 3 and 4 were the ones that you can see now. You can no longer see 5 and 6. But on the tour, we were able to see 3 and 4, and they were both blown up like this. Here you can see just barely one of the little openings of what used to be an oven. This is like the back wall of the oven. And then you can see the little archway. That's where they would put the bodies through. And then that's the back view of the same thing. This is what the houses at Birkenau looked like. So you have much smaller windows, much longer buildings, and they were only 1 story. Here in the back, these were more of the outhouses, so you could go and use the bathroom back there. However, you were afforded very, very little privacy. It wasn't like you get your own private bathroom. There's 10 holes in a bench right there, so you all go to the bathroom right next to each other. And as I'm about to show you in the next picture, well, this is actually like the way that they would walk towards the crematorium. I took this picture. This is actually me. I took this picture because I was feeling some type of way when we were walking down there. Like I said, I was mostly in shock for the main portion that we were there because I knew so much about what had happened, but I didn't know. You didn't know until you saw it. But this was part of the trip where I actually felt like I could feel. I'm kind of a spiritual person. I almost felt like I could feel the souls of the prisoners as they were marched to the gas chambers. So, Cooper, stop. Cooper, stop. Sorry, my dog's growling. But this would be them marching their way towards the extermination camps after a brutal journey. A lot of times being told to take all their clothes off as they were going to save time. So it was very brutal. This, I'm going to show you the little sign for it first. A lot of the barracks were for normal use. This specific barrack was the death barrack, and it was used for the special isolation of those women prisoners of the concentration camp who were selected by the SS as unfit for further work to be sent to be murdered in the gas chambers. Here they had to await their deaths without food or water, and often for several days. Many died in the barrack before they were summoned. When the barrack was full, additional prisoners who had been selected for death were kept outside in a locked yard. So this is that barrack. Most of the barracks are very similar to one another. So this is representative of the other barracks as well. But this is that locked yard that they were talking about. And usually you didn't have a locked yard. That was gone, and there were like open areas here. What you can't see in this picture is that I'm actually standing on a wooden walkway, because when it rains, which it had kind of rained a little the day before, this whole place is a muddy mess. So when it says that when the barracks was full, people would be kept out here, they would be standing in the mud, in the snow, outside all the time. Whenever they were supposed to be sleeping and getting their rest, they would be outside in the mud and the snow. And oftentimes the excrement and feces as well, because the death house, although some of the houses had bathrooms, this one did not. So you would have to go outside, squat on the side of the yard. And as our guard told us, or not our guard, the guide told us, some of the guards thought it would be funny if someone was using the bathroom to just kind of shoot them. So a lot of people didn't like to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, because it was kind of a toss-up as to whether or not you would make it back in alive. So no matter how bad you had to go. And one of the things that was a really big killer in the concentration camp, besides the actual like gas chambers themselves, was disease, mainly dysentery, which is a disease that you get from part of it's a lack of food and water, and then another part of it is an actual bacteria that gets into your system, but you basically poop yourself to death. So you would have people who can't control themselves, and if you look here at the beds, you're layered 3 up, because you have this bed and you have this bed, and then when it got real crowded, there were people sleeping on the floor as well. And as I was told, the people on the floor were usually the people who were the sickest, because if you could, you would try and get up here so that nothing else is coming down onto you, whether it's vomit, pee, poop. Mind you, this is also the women's dormitory, so periods are a thing. They don't give you anything for that. So only the sickest people were the ones down here. They were pretty much the ones that resigned themselves to die, because they could not get any higher, and it was the most disgusting out of all of the areas to sleep. Now again, mind you, you also are sleeping 3 to one of these bunks, usually 3 or 4. 2 if you're lucky, but usually 3 or 4. So you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 9 people in the space of some people's closets. Very rough. And here you can see just how many of those spaces you have. So like 9, 18, math, 36, I'm not going to try and do math right now, but that's how many people would be in it. And now, I know we live in Florida and we don't have to deal with the snow very often, but if you have dealt with snow, or even just picture your coldest day in Florida, that entire house has 2 of these radiators. So you would put coal into the front and then you would burn it and it would have a little fire and it's supposed to create a little heat. There were 2 for that entire house. That's only like half the house. So imagine 6 feet of snow outside and that's your only source of warmth. A lot of people died from pure frostbite, freezing to death, especially if you were outside in that yard. So that's those pictures. I have a couple more. Those were Auschwitz and Birkenau. That was the concentration camp that I was able to tour and visit. And I wanted to show you guys those pictures. I also have why I have a couple more. This was one of the first places that I went to on my tour. So if you watch the video version of last week's assignment, the woman who was telling her story was a Hungarian Jew, and Hungary was one of the last places that deported their Jews to the concentration camps, because like Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Germany, France, they were all sent prior to Hungary. By the time in Hungary, a lot of people were just trying to get rid of as many Jews as possible. So one way that they did this was they shot Jews on the banks of the Danube River. So we were in the city of Budapest, which is actually 2 cities put together. There's Buda on one side and Pest on the other side. You put them together, it's Budapest. So they took Jewish people from the Jewish ghetto, which was where they were concentrated during the Holocaust after they were kicked out of their houses while they were waiting to do whatever. The Jewish people didn't know what they were waiting on. The Nazis knew that they were waiting to kill them. When near the end of the war, they started getting more desperate, and they couldn't transport everybody to these concentration camps. So what they did was they lined up Jewish prisoners from the ghetto, and they would line them up along the river here, in this stretch here. And they would have them take off all their clothes, take off their shoes, which is why these memorial shoes are here. Then they would tie 3 people together, shoot one, and push them all into the river, because they were trying to save bullets. This was something that I learned on my trip. I'd never heard of this before, and it absolutely killed me. Like, they were trying to save bullets, so they only shot one because they knew that the dead weight from one person would drown the other 2 when tying them all 3 together. So they had them take off their shoes, which is what this memorial is now for. You have different shoes from all the different kinds of people that were shot on the Danube. And these are like metallic shoes. It's an actual like memorial, kind of like a statue memorial. But yeah, so in memory of the victims shot into the Danube by Arrow Cross militiamen, 1944 to 1945. So that was one of the things I want to show you. And oh yes, the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin. So Berlin is the capital of Germany, and Germany has taken complete ownership of the Holocaust. They know that it exists. They teach about it in their history class, and they teach about how awful it is. so that they try to avoid any other consequence like this. As such, they actually have a memorial in the center of their city for the Holocaust. And this is kind of what it looks like. So it starts out on one side. This is supposed to be the beginning. And so you see these little kind of statues, and they're all different heights. There seems to be no pattern, except that as you get closer to the middle, it's higher and higher and higher. And then, come on now, we're just going through my whole camera roll, really? Here. Until you get to these parts, which are more than twice the size of an actual like normal human. They're like 10 feet tall, 10, 12 feet tall. Like that's me. I know I'm short, but like that's still really, really tall. And supposedly it's supposed to represent the mounting death toll as you get further into the war. And then you come back out the other side and there's like less and less and less. But it's still meant to represent all the people who died in the Holocaust. And it's put right next to the Reichstag, which is the government building in Germany. And the idea is that German politicians can look back and see this from their office so that they never make a mistake like this again. So that's the German government building, and then the Holocaust memorial. Last thing, I know this is already a super long video. Hope you're finding it interesting at least. These are pictures of the site where Hitler killed himself. So you can see here, Führer bunker is the basically bunker where the Führer, or Hitler, the leader of Germany, Nazi Germany, killed himself. So this is a sign explaining what it was, what the bunker looked like, has pictures of what happened, and then if you look, wrong way, it's just a parking lot. It's literally a park. There's nothing there besides that one sign to show you that that was where Hitler killed himself. And that was done on purpose because it was in a bunker underground anyway. So it's not like you're going to build a memorial to him. Like it's a literal parking lot. They called it a car park. It's a literal parking lot. So I'm standing right above the ground where Hitler killed himself, which is why I'm smiling, and unlike all the other stuff that you've seen in this video. Because that's where he killed himself. But the idea was that you make it known that that's where it is. But they're trying very hard to make sure that it doesn't become like a shrine to neo-Nazis who are like, oh, Hitler was the greatest. And then they come and they like put flowers on his memorial and stuff like that. Germany very much owns up to the fact that it was an awful time in history. And they're trying to not forget it, but correct it. So yeah, it's a lot. Very long video, but hopefully this gives you guys some real world perspective and a little more character into what you were learning, a little more personal touch. And I hope you found it interesting, and I hope that it helps further your education on the Holocaust and world history in general. I'll be coming back with more pictures from the D-Day celebration this week, and then next week we'll be talking about the Berlin Wall, and I'll show you some pictures from that as well. So have a good day, World Changers.